Police are hoping missing person reports could shed some light on a gruesome find at Phillip Island, a woman's tattooed left leg. The tattoo features red and violet flowers on a twisting vine.
He's laid a card and teddy bear at the back gate of the house where a lot of people laid tributes. And he's just played the normal local in grief about what has happened.
I had the bonnet of the car up, I had the boot of the car open, and when the young girl was walking past the car, I grabbed her in the boot.
There was a black and white photo of a tattoo and something about a leg being found, and I looked at it and I thought, what's that?
They say they're confident they're closing in on Raechel's killer, and quickly.
He asked her whether she'd like to come in and see a dissection.
This guy is a master manipulator. He had people wrapped around his little fingers, and the system allowed him out to do this.
There is no such thing as closure for me, and there never will be. There never has been any sense of closure at all.
God knows what he really did, or even definitely where he did it, because no DNA was recovered from the bathroom where she was supposed to have been cut up.
In August 2009, 27-year-old childcare worker Raechel Betts went missing from her home in Epping, a northern suburb of Melbourne. What happened to her would leave a family devastated and shine a light on the nation's criminal justice system.
At the start of Raechel's life, Raechel was an only child for about 11 years. I had her at a time when most of my friends didn't have children, so she was very popular with my friends. She was a real asset to the family all the time. She was great with her cousins, my nieces. She was the eldest of the 7 girls.
Raechel was a very loving girl. It's not unusual in a step-parenting situation where the children are not too happy about one of their parents having a new partner and vice versa, and possibly having step-siblings. And Raechel built bridges between my children and the younger 2 girls.
Raechel was really good at making friends with strangers pretty much on the spot. Anybody she wanted to meet, she would just march right up and do so. Very bubbly and very good at making people feel welcome and like they were instantly the most important person around her. Just fun and lovable.
Although we lived together, sometimes we didn't see each other every day. I'd hear her get up in the morning. I always knew she was up and awake and getting ready because I could smell her toast and coffee.
She was always happy and bouncy. She was always happy to see you, happy to help. She was just one of those people who inspired you to be better. She was Raechel. You got a problem, you call her, she's there.
I could always call and talk to her if I was, say, having an argument at home or worried about school or my personal issues with friends or anything like that. She always made us feel that she would never judge us.
As she got older, she began to be interested in other things like education. She really wanted to be a teacher and a carer of children, which might have been influenced by babysitting us all the time.
Raechel had devoted her life to children. By the age of 27, she had a successful career as a childcare worker. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to have children of her own. In late 2008, she met 2 teenagers who were looking for a place to stay. Raechel's caring nature meant she was quick to welcome them into her home.
Raechel had met them through a friend of ours' neighbour, so they started to drop in and they were both having issues home. So Raechel, being Raechel, went, any problems, you can always come here and stay here.
When Raechel took the girls in October 2008, November 2008, the second one, they really took over her life. And at first I thought that they were the source of the problems. The longer the girls were with her, the more she seemed run down, and I was sort of thinking, well, she's overworked and this is getting too much for her.
She was always stressed about money and being able to get by, basically being able to provide. It had 2 jobs and she lost one of them.
Faced with an ever-dwindling income, looking after the 2 girls was beginning to take its toll on Raechel and left her in an increasingly vulnerable situation. When an opportunity to make some extra money arose, Raechel was keen to take advantage.
Raechel had met a fellow, and this fellow had been working with an older man, and that older man had said to this guy that he was looking for young people to recruit to sell drugs, and for some reason this guy introduced Raechel to him, and as I understand it, came round and did a sell, you know. Oh, look at you, you're trying to look after 2 kids and you're working so hard with 2 jobs, and, you know, you could have the girls through the day and run them around, and at night time you could go out to some nightclubs and pubs or whatever, and you can meet up with people, you can sell some drugs, you'll make a lot of money, your life will be easier, things will be better for you if you do this. How he managed to make that sell, I don't know, but she decided to give it a go. I guess she probably thought I could stop work for a while, see how it goes, you know. The problem with when you're moving with people who take those drugs, rather than just selling it, she was actually taking it. And it began to have quite a severe effect on her after a while.
Raechel began abusing crystal meth, or ice, an insidious drug that is ravaging parts of Australia. It began to take a terrible toll on Raechel, both physically and mentally, and her life began to spiral out of control.
We actually end up having, after living together for years, end up having a bit of an argument, and I moved out in March of 2009. I can honestly say she probably knew me better than anybody, and same for me with her, but by that time I couldn't tell you what she'd been up to for the day. Usually I could tell you what she ate for breakfast, lunch and dinner.
She started to develop some of these symptoms of paranoia, and it was obvious that something was wrong. She said there were all these people she didn't know were coming around, friends of the young girls were coming around, and she was feeling uncomfortable and unsafe. This paranoia thing that comes with taking these drugs was affecting her. She started becoming delusional. She had all kinds of strange experiences where she thought she was being watched or being followed. She was involved in a car accident where this car came through a red light and she thought that it had been set up and somehow deliberate. These sort of delusional ideas that do come with that particular drug, ice. Her teeth were very important to her. Smile was beautiful. And here she is taking this drug that is making her grind her teeth. And that really distressed me. I cried when I saw she had a baby's dummy by the bed to put between her teeth so that she wouldn't grind them and that she'd protect those front teeth. That, my God, what is going on here? And I could see that there was this deterioration in her.
The final straw for her friends and family came when Raechel collapsed at her friend's home.
She went to the hospital to be examined because they thought they may have been drugged and raped, so took her to the doctors to make sure everything was checked out, they were safe, blood tests. The crisis assessment team came because she wasn't well. Unfortunately, I think it was the drugs that got to her and made her paranoid.
They assessed her, took her to the hospital, got her into rehab to dry her out, and July she was back here with us, with her sisters and myself, and in a safe place.
Despite returning home, the temptations of her other life were proving too much for Raechel.
She had a party one night, a couple of friends round, and the girls were here and they had come out to stay for a couple of nights, and they were getting noisy. The point is to keep her away from any drugs, and there wasn't supposed to be any drugs, so I asked them to leave. Anyway, Raechel took it as an opportunity to go and take the girls and go off to this other place that she had been organising for them to live at.
When she was leaving, she was distressed, and I was quite distressed too. She just felt, I think, stifled, living under her mother's roof again. I remember saying to her that you're being looked after here, that it had been a positive thing that she was here. But I think she felt guilty, and the last words she ever said to me in person were, "If I leave tonight, will you still love me tomorrow?" And I started to cry and said, "Of course I will." I felt like I had only just gotten my big sister back for the first time in quite a while. And to have her leave that night, I was filled with dread. I knew that nothing good could come of it.
What her family couldn't have known was that it would be the last time they would see Raechel alive.
Human remains have washed up on a beach southeast of Melbourne. The gruesome discovery was made by a man jogging along Ventnor Beach on Phillip Island.
I rang her up especially to say to her to please come home here to this house. I said to her, "I'm really worried. You're not safe there. You're safe here. Please come home," I said. They were my last words to her. Please come home.
On the 18th of August, a new story broke about a grisly discovery at a popular tourist destination.
Police are hoping missing person reports could shed some light on a gruesome find at Phillip Island, a woman's tattooed left leg. The tattoo features red and violet flowers on a twisting vine.
The revelation about the tattooed leg set off alarm bells for Sandra. Holding on to the slender hope that her daughter was alive and well, she began frantically calling Raechel's friends.
I phoned Epping and asked the girls, "Where's Raechel? And have you heard from her? Have you spoken to her?" And the youngest one lied to me and said, "Oh, yes, I heard from her about lunchtime, and this isn't right." And so I said, "Put the other girl on the phone," and she said, "Oh no, I haven't seen her for days, and we've been calling and she's not answering." And this was just totally out of character. If Raechel was doing something, those girls would know exactly where she was going, exactly when she'd be back, how to contact her while she was away.
Raechel had disappeared, and we didn't know where she was, and Sandra was getting very frantic. She'd started placing calls to friends and family and sent text out to everybody that she thought Raechel knew.
Her mother called me up one day and messaged me, so 12 at night time, midnight, and I've gone, "Who's messaging me at midnight?" And I found out it was a clear recall with Sandra, Raechel's mum. "Have you seen Raechel?" So I called up and said, "This is David." "No, I haven't seen her for 2 months. She's supposed to be in rehab." And that's when she told me about the foot they found on the beach, with the tattoo same as Raechel's. So there started the course to worry that Raechel may have died or something may have happened to her.
At the location of the grim discovery on Phillip Island, detectives were beginning to arrive at the beach that was now a crime scene.
I was afternoon on call on Sunday, the 16th of August 2009. I was contacted by Detective Sergeant Sean Audley, and he advised that a leg had been found at New Haven Beach, Phillip Island. It was a female leg, a full female leg. It had been severed around the hip joint. It appeared that, I guess, it would be a non-survivable incident that had occurred, so expected foul play pretty much straight away. There was a floral tattoo on the foot, and it gave us something at least to go and start checking our records to see if there were missing persons, firstly, and there's various databases of people with tattoos. They were looked at in the following days, and we weren't really getting anywhere with that. That came to nothing.
Rain got onto the computer and looked up some photos on Facebook, and she saw a photo of Raechel dancing barefoot, and it was definitely the left foot that had the tattoo on it. And that's when I phoned the police and said, look, I think that this is my daughter.
DNA testing conclusively proved Sandra's worst fears. The leg did indeed belong to her daughter. 3 weeks later, further remains were found on another beach, followed by reports of a right leg sighted by the crew of a ferry. Tragically, the rest of Raechel's body was never recovered. Now they had identified the victim, police began to investigate Raechel's background for clues as to what had led to her tragic death. It wasn't long until her associations with the world of illegal drugs came to light.
She was working in childcare till about end of 2008, and after that point in time, 2009, it appears that that's when the drug dealing took off.
Raechel had been given the impression that she could make easy money quickly. It meant for Raechel that she could get that bigger house, have that money for the rent and bond, to move myself, herself, the girls, they'd have their own room. It wasn't for a lavish lifestyle, it was so that Raechel felt that she could provide for them. It just didn't work out that way for her.
Raechel's mother, Sandra, was aware that her daughter was mixing with nefarious characters, and one name in particular was causing her great concern. 54-year-old parolee, John Leslie Coombs.
I had conversations with her about John Coombs and said, this man sounds really wrong to me. And she said, well, he's got a criminal history. I said, well, you've got to avoid this person. This is not good.
A search of Raechel's home in Epping was also making detectives suspicious about John Coombs.
There were various diaries that mentioned various people that she knew, lots of phone numbers. Also, some drug dealing type of equations were in these things as well. There's a reference to being scared of a JC, whom we believe to be John Coombs. But the more digging we did, I suppose speaking to friends of Raechel, we realised that John Coombs was her boss in relation to drug dealing. And we also spoke to one person who said that Raechel told them that she was going fishing with her boss, and she was looking forward to it. But going fishing seemed to be code for going away and dealing in drugs or drug type of trip. And those closest to her knew that's what the terminology meant. And we also go through the list of names of people that she knew, and obviously John Coombs stood out because of his prior criminal history. Raechel's family, they knew obviously how close Raechel was with these girls in her care, and they found it very hard to believe that these girls didn't know where Raechel had gone on that Tuesday evening. These girls were very fearful. They were told by Raechel that she was gone and she'd be on a fishing trip for 48 hours at the latest sort of thing. So after that period of time, they became increasingly concerned. They did know that she went away with John Coombs, but they were terrified to speak with us about it. They thought the best course of action was to keep it to themselves. I think they got a bit of an idea that we were on the right track with Mr. Coombs anyway. I dealt with the two girls fairly regularly over that first 2 months. I ended up taking about half a dozen statements from the youngest one, who was probably closest to Raechel. And she took a while to warm to us as well, because all she'd really known, I suppose, was she'd seen Raechel drug trafficking, and I guess police were the enemy if you're out there drug trafficking. And after a while, she decided that it was okay to divulge what she did know, and she knew a lot.
With the help of the young girl, detectives were able to trace Raechel's last movements. On the 10th of August, 6 days before her remains were found, Raechel drove the 20 minutes from Epping to Heidelberg, where she left her car, and was allegedly picked up at some nearby shops by John Coombs. The last time anyone was in contact with Raechel was 6:30 that night, when she spoke to her friend Deanne on the phone. The call betrayed none of the imminent danger Raechel was in.
She'd said to me she was going fishing. She'd be back, and I said, well, you know, because we'd planned to meet up on the Monday. And she said, no, I'll be fine, I'll be back. And I said, seemed happy and to be doing whatever maybe she was doing. It sounded to me like she was jumping in a car. She didn't seem scared. To my understanding, when Raechel was talking, she was happy about wherever she was going. So at no point did she sound threatened or anything like that. I don't believe Raechel thought that she wasn't coming back.
When questioned by police, Coombs provided a seemingly solid alibi to explain his movements at the time of Raechel's disappearance. His associates corroborated his story. However, using mobile phone tracking and other techniques, detectives were quick to cast doubt on his version of events. As their suspicions grew, and in order to establish the facts, the decision was made to arrest John Coombs. Also arrested were his associates, Coombs' 54-year-old partner Maureen Renwick, another acquaintance Nicole Godfrey, and friend Ryan Buscema.
We believe we had sufficient evidence to arrest him and to charge him with the murder of Raechel Betts, but also the other people that we arrested at the time too, as in Maureen Renwick, Ryan Buscema and Nicole Godfrey. So it was a coordinated arrest of all of those people to get their version of events at the same time. So once we arrested him, we placed him in the vehicle, and Lee Smith said to him, the hardest part saying it. And he said, yeah, I know. She pushed my buttons, and he said, I killed her. She made me fucking angry. She taunted me. That's what he said.
Police now had Raechel's alleged killer in custody. They now had to determine exactly what had happened to her.
No one really knows exactly what happened to Raechel. We've got Mr. Coombs' version of events as to when I interviewed him. He said that they drove down there together to Phillip Island, to 3 Terry Crescent, Wimbledon Heights, Nicole Godfrey's house, and that they arrived there after midnight, and that Nicole Godfrey had a cup of coffee or a cup of tea with the two of them. Mr. Coombs says that after they had their coffee or whatever, Raechel went and lay in one of the rooms on the bed.
Detectives were stunned when, in an effort to explain what had happened to her, Coombs claimed that Raechel was implicated in the abuse of the 2 girls she was caring for.
Mr. Coombs claimed that Raechel let him know that she'd allowed for the girls to be sexually assaulted, and that she made money out of it because the girls got to pay her debts. And Coombs claimed that infuriated him, and he decided to put her in a sleeper hold and strangle her. I said, well, how did you do it? And he showed with arm movements as to what he did in relation to strangling Raechel.
Coombs went on to describe how he mutilated Raechel's body.
He said that she deserved to die, didn't deserve to go to leave this earth as a woman. So he says he's stabbed her repeatedly in the breast region, and we believe that was after she'd died. You had to look at it as if this was a side of beef. That's how he kind of described it. It was something where the life had gone. It's a piece of meat that he had to just make the cuts, separate the joints, treat it like that. That's how he referred to it. He did that when I interviewed him. He explained it that way, and he also explained it the same way to Maureen Renwick in a prison phone call. He said he had to make something bigger, smaller. Pretty horrendous.
Another chilling version of events came from Nicole Godfrey, Coombs' acquaintance, who was present in the house on the supposed night of Raechel's murder.
She talked about limbs popping and things like that she could hear, and that at one stage he asked her whether she'd like to come in and see a dissection. So she was certainly present whilst this was going on in her bathroom, and it was quite a small 3-bedroom house down there.
Despite the detail and the description, detectives questioned the veracity of Coombs's version of events.
At one point, he did talk to Maureen on the phone about it, and he said something about the manner of death, and it was like one click. It was the cleanest kill ever. So you hear that and you say to yourself, well, what is that then? Is that a strangulation? Is that breaking of the neck? Or what is that? You know, it could be I don't know.
In my mind, I saw him cutting out her tattoos on her abdomen. He also cut her breasts off. And again, we got all kinds of stories. Oh, he used 5 different knives. Oh no, he used a box cutter that you keep cutting the thing.
It's hard to believe a word that comes out of Mr. Coombs's mouth. It's very difficult to know when it was that she was actually killed. There was no forensic evidence, but they did clean with bleach-based cleaning products.
God knows what he really did, or even definitely where he did it, because no DNA was recovered from the bathroom where she was supposed to have been cut up.
It came as no surprise to Sandra Betts when John Leslie Coombs was charged with her daughter's murder in November 2009.
When the police asked us who did we think it would likely to be, we said John Coombs, because we knew he had some kind of criminal history. And at the time, that was all I knew. I now know a great deal more about him.
There was a lot of police reports, a lot of coronial reports that we had to go through to look at Coombs's past, and it's a very dark past. We were told that Coombs had 2 previous convictions, and 2 major previous convictions where he'd killed 2 people.
He killed a fellow by the name of Michael Sperani in February 1984.
Michael Sperani lived in the seaside town of Mount Martha. In 1984, he was selling his car, and his potential purchaser was one John Leslie Coombs. On the pretense of confirming whether the car could tow a boat, Coombs hitched up a trailer and then offered Michael the chance to accompany him on a trip out to sea.
John Coombs enticed Michael Sperani to come out for a ride on the boat.
It transpired that Sperani was dating one of Coombs's friends, a relationship that his friend disapproved of. Coombs seemingly had thought of a solution to this problem.
It appears he was assaulted on the boat, and then he was stabbed by Coombs. He was thrown out into the water, and Coombs then ran over him with the boat's propeller, and then after a while went up to him and pulled him up slightly, and then stabbed him some more. And Coombs made a comment to his wife at the time, when he later relayed what happened, and said that he stabbed him a little bit so the fish could finish him off.
"44-year-old Henry Desmond Kells was asleep in his Edith Vale home when he was attacked in the early hours of the 17th of November, 1984.
Another good friend of his by the name of Opie, it appears that Kells was socialising with Opie's landlady, and this upset Opie, and Opie complained to Coombs about it, and Coombs thought he'd go and fix that problem as well.
Broke into the bungalow knowing he would be asleep and drunk, and attacked him in a really vicious way. He pinned him down. There were bruises on Kells' feet and knees.
There's evidence that he's punching and that sort of thing, and then Coombs went to the kitchen, got a knife, and stabbed him and killed him, and also mutilated his genitalia. We believe it's probably to try and give the impression that there'd been some sort of sexual transgression and maybe revenge had taken place, something like that, which seems to be another theme with Mr. Coombs as well. He seems to blame sexual misbehaviour, or he alleges sexual misbehaviour on behalf of victims, and And he did that in that occasion with Sperani, and I believe he was probably trying to give the same impression in relation to what happened with Desmond Kells as well.
In 1985, Coombs was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Henry Desmond Kells. He was granted an 11-year minimum term on appeal. At his parole hearing, the board was told that Coombs did not pose a substantial threat to the community. What they weren't aware of, though, was that he had murdered Michael Sperani 8 months before killing Kells and had got away with it. Satisfied he was safe to release, Coombs left prison in October 1996. Within 3 months of being paroled, Coombs was arrested again and convicted of Sperani's murder. Despite being now responsible for the deaths of 2 men, but supposedly rehabilitated, he was handed a minimum term of just 10 years. By 2007, Coombs was released on parole back into the community, where he started a relationship with Maureen Renwick and began dealing drugs. Just 2 years after his release, while still on parole, Raechel would be dead.
And he did try and present as the jovial, grandfatherly type figure. He was quite cunning and devious the way he operated.
To look at him, you wouldn't think he was dangerous to that extent. I'd met him twice. My first reaction to him was, well, why are you hanging out with someone that's that age?
This guy is a master manipulator. He had people wrapped around his little fingers, and he cultivated a facade. There was this nice, jolly, plump guy who would never harm a fly.
While Raechel's loved ones tried to comprehend Coombs's dangerous past and began to ask questions of a justice system that let a killer out onto the streets not once, but twice, detectives were preparing to go to trial.
John Leslie Coombs will face the Melbourne Magistrates Court for allegedly strangling the 27-year-old and throwing her off a pier on Phillip Island.
First, you have the committal in the Magistrates Court, where they test to see whether the proceedings will be successful in the Supreme Court. It means that Coombs was able to introduce things in the Magistrates Court, claims about Raechel which were untrue.
The committal process, the media report all the things that are a bit sensational and made Raechel look to be a drug-using, drug-selling woman. That the worst parts, I suppose, that came out from the witnesses, that was what was reported.
He claimed that Raechel had set these girls up for sex acts, for money and all this rubbish, and the girls were interviewed in the court and they said, no, that didn't happen, Raechel would never do that to us, etc. But he did succeed in besmirching her name, which was what he wanted to do. He got this rubbish into the press.
He said that, Raechel said that if he played his cards right, she could have his way with the little one, as in the young girl, the younger of the 2 girls. When I interviewed about that and told him that he didn't say that previously to me, he goes, oh, I did. Well, he didn't. We went back and checked the transcripts from the interview and he never did.
To me, it was just another excuse to paint what he'd done in a better light, like as if he was doing society a favour by what he'd done.
I don't believe that she exposed those girls to or encouraged any sort of interference of them, or allowed it to happen. There's no evidence at all to suggest that, apart from what comes out of Coombs's mouth, which cannot be believed at all.
Little could prepare Raechel's family for the emotional torment of being exposed to the baseless allegations about their sister, peddled by John Coombs.
We had to put up with a lot of lies being told about Raechel in the media, and we weren't really allowed to say anything back or do anything back, which was very hard for a long time.
I never realised how much the journalists themselves are able to pick and choose interesting or sort of headline-grabbing elements of any given case and put it together in their own way. Because the way that cases like these are portrayed to the public have a really quite a large influence on how the public then see the victim or see the perpetrator.
The way victims and their relatives are treated in court was a shock to the Betts family, and something they have been inspired to try and change.
That's an issue I'm raising at the moment, along with the issue of having your own barrister in court to represent the victim's interests specifically as a third party. And I think that that's something that happens in a lot of countries around the world, and it needs to be looked at here. We need the pendulum to shift a bit the other way. At the moment, the victim doesn't have equal rights to the accused, and the right to counsel, I think, is a very important one.
After the committal, we were booked off for trial, so organised all the witnesses, and then on day one of the trial, he decided to plead guilty.
On the 26th of August 2011, John Leslie Coombs was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility for parole for the murder of Raechel Betts. The judge ordered that his sentence would be served cumulatively with his existing term for the Sperani murder. In passing sentence, the judge described Coombs as someone with a frightening predilection for murder.
I think the thing that stuck out the most was on the day of sentencing, when he was in court and they read out the sentence and he was being led from the dock out the side door, and he gave the finger up, known as the bird, to the courtroom on the way out, as if to say, well, I don't really care.
He stuck his finger up at him. Like, screw you, I killed your daughter and I'm still alive. Like, he's a monster who doesn't deserve to be alive.
It's really hard to say what justice is, isn't it? We got the best outcome that could be created in the circumstances. We got a judge who saw through all the lies and the stories and the accusations that Coombs made, and who saw that this is a person who had to get a life sentence with no minimum, and he really saw it clearly for what it was, because he didn't make them concurrent. He made consecutive life sentences. It will be life followed by life, and no minimum set.
As a way of coping with the loss of her daughter, Sandra Betts has fought for a more rigorous examination of the parole system, something that is a cornerstone of the Australian legal process.
Parole is a system that enables the gradual supervised release of people from prison into the community. So typically when someone is sentenced to a term of imprisonment, they will get a minimum sentence and a maximum sentence. And what determines when they're released after serving that minimum sentence is a decision by the parole authority, the parole board, and they have to decide, is it appropriate for that person to be released?
Well, the parole system was so broken. Coombs was recommended for parole on the basis that he was assessed as a low risk, a double murderer. I wouldn't have thought that that could be possible given the sentence he had. But because he was assessed as low risk and the parole board didn't question this, he was assigned to a junior corrections person. He wasn't monitored very much. So there weren't the checks, the cross-checking on what he's saying is true or not true, and what he's doing is what he says he's doing, what accommodation is the appropriate accommodation.
What we have seen in Victoria most recently is some very serious failures that have shone a light on the parole system, and that's been a good thing. It shouldn't have taken those horrific crimes for this kind of reform to happen. There's been a substantial increase in the parole board's budget. There's been improvements in the quality of information that is being presented to the parole board to enable it to make proper decisions around managing the risk to the community. We saw something like 10,000 decisions being made every year with only a few minutes for the parole board to consider each one of those decisions. When you consider the potential risks involved and the importance around those decisions, it really was an unsustainable practice that we had. That's now changing, and that's a positive thing.
The death of Raechel Betts and other high-profile murders has made the Australian justice system question itself and its processes. But despite the improvements that have and continue to be made, it is little comfort for Raechel's friends and family, who still have to live their lives without her.
The grief that comes with the sort of experience where your daughter is murdered is really intense and invasive, and it pervades daily life. Most mornings I will wake up with some thoughts of Raechel, and it's 6 years down the track. And there's always the important times, that her birthday, she'd be 33 now. It's awful. And I know it's not just me that's affected, my children have been very affected.
I miss my confidant. I miss the support, the unconditional support. I was looking forward to her teaching me how to drive and being there when I graduated high school. I have a sense of what she's lost as well, though, is what I've lost. I've lost my sister, my hero, but she's lost the potential of a full life.
It makes me really both angry and sad that she didn't get to see me become an adult myself, and then to be able to have that relationship with her on a different level, and like every, you know, new step I take in life, she doesn't get to know about that or to see that. And you see me become someone that we probably could have been even closer now than we were before. And I'm also kind of irrationally scared of overtaking her age. To become older than my older sister is really strange but scary to me.
I dread time moving forward. I remember dates and numbers, anniversaries, and I feel more hopeless and frustrated that every year goes by is another year further away from what happened.
I can tell you without word of a lie, I have never heard anything as bad as the Kapunda triple murder. There is simply no comparison.
I mean, like, they were just good people. I just don't understand why someone would do this.
Destroying a family one after the other in front of their eyes, in their own home. There's no greater evil than that. He's sitting there skinny, weedy and weak, and I just could not believe that this was the person that had perpetrated 3 murders.
No emotion, no sorrow, no grief, no nothing. Just a very cold individual.
Kapunda, 80 kilometres north of Adelaide, is a small town once home to a bustling mining community.
Kapunda and the metal mine here is Australia's first commercial metal mine. It's a tourist attraction.
There are mines that you can still walk through, there are tours that you can go on, and to everybody else in South Australia, Kapunda is a low-level tourist destination. A little bit isolated as a result, and living that very stereotypical Aussie country life. You grow up with the group that you grow up with, you know them from birth through death, you take over a farm or you take over a business. On rare occasions you actually get out of the town and do something else, but you've always got that tie back there. And the bonds that form in communities like Kapunda are lifelong, sometimes whether you like it or not.
But the scene that is to unfold in Harriet Street on the morning of the 8th of November 2010 is one that the quaint tourist town has never seen before.
I was in my office going through a variety of files, and Senior Sergeant Steve Kinsman came into the office and said that they had 3 bodies had been found in the house at Kapunda. Someone else had found the crime scene. They'd contacted the local police, and there's only 2 police officers in that town. One of them attended and saw the scene. He had an ambulance arrive. He entered the house with an ambulance officer to determine that all those people in the house were beyond help and that they were deceased. The biggest crime prior to this, as far as anyone was aware of, was that someone set fire to Map the Miner, which was a symbol there.
An unprecedented scene confronted emergency services as the 3 victims sadly could not be saved.
I was hearing sporadic bits and pieces of information coming through from our investigative reporters, our police reporters, all of whom were trying to get information. What emerged very quickly was that police were keeping a very tight lid on the situation. They either knew completely what they were dealing with or had no idea whatsoever and were trying to keep things as tight as they possibly could while they sorted it out.
It's fair to say that that crime scene was very confronting. There's been some criticism by the media on that day that I didn't declare that it was a triple murder. Well, to be honest, until you get in and have a really good look, that can be a big call to make. And if you're going to tell a community that 3 people have been murdered and you don't know who is responsible for it, you better be sure that that's what you're telling them. You don't want it to turn out that it was a murder-suicide later on.
Information on the circumstances of the deaths was sporadic, but Grant Moyle and his colleagues needed to process the extent of the crime scene and uncover exactly what had happened.
First and foremost, who have we got in the house? Who lives there? And who's died in that house at that particular time? Are there any outstanding people? Early information was the names of the people involved and that their son was away in Queensland at that particular time.
The 3 victims are eventually identified as Rose and Andrew Rowe, and their 16-year-old daughter, Chantel. Their older son, Christopher, is on holiday on the Gold Coast.
While Christopher and his fiancée were up there, news broke of the murders. Christopher saw in the news coverage his street, posted a message on Facebook, "Can somebody check on my parents? That's my street." And they're talking about people being killed there. He got a reply back very early in the piece saying, "All's good." So he relaxed. But unfortunately, that was misinformation. That person had mistaken which house it was. And in their effort to help Christopher, they'd given him the wrong information. Christopher then found out it was his parents and his sister. So of course, it went from being the dream holiday to the absolute nightmare.
Obviously, we had to clarify exactly when he'd left and when we're satisfied that he certainly couldn't be connected to this, and try to get some background from him. Did he know of any people who might be responsible for this? Were there any other issues with the family that we weren't aware of?
I was just absolutely devastated for the family because they were friends of mine, and Christopher remains a very, very dear friend, and I will support him as long as I can.
As the only surviving immediate relative tries to take in the news, the police search for a motive.
What I will say is that yes, there was certainly a frenzied attack. Because of the nature of the scene, I think it was a very personal attack. And so I don't think it was just someone random. But that doesn't allay community fears, and certainly some fears from the beginning, and that was, did they have a murder on the loose in the town?
The Rowe family moved to Kapunda just a few years earlier, with Andrew running his own carpet cleaning business, and by all accounts had settled well into the community. Now viciously attacked in their home and left for dead, the police need to alleviate growing fears within the small town.
I was just devastated, but then I had to take a deep breath and say, right, we've got something on our hands here that we've got to manage and make sure our people are feeling safe.
As more details started to emerge about Andrew Rose and Chantel Rowe, questions started being asked and rumours started coming out. And they were, as is typical for Adelaide, unfortunate and unfair rumours.
Some information was coming in about the family, people were ringing up, and that information had to be followed up, a variety of different lines of inquiry. And for example, there was Andrew owned a large motorcycle that looked like a Harley Davidson, so there was some speculation of, is it bikey or drug related? Well, those things had to be ruled out. It wasn't even a Harley, so we ruled that out. But it took a number of hours to do that.
There was a sense of, of angst in the town. I think there's no doubt about that. And like any smaller community, you're going to get the Chinese whispers and all of that. So that had to be managed also.
Of course, then we were talking to the local police and the neighbours, etc., to try to get some of that other information. That was done through door knocks of the area.
As house-to-house inquiries begin and friends and relatives are questioned, an anonymous phone call is to reveal some alarming news.
Some information came in through Crime Stoppers that a person had read a post on Facebook where a person had written that they had done something terrible, didn't know how they could live with themselves, they were very sorry, and words to that effect. And that person lived very close to this crime scene, and also we could establish a connection with the family. And we thought, is this the man? Is he confessing on Facebook?
Officers raced to question the man about his message on the social networking site.
We were all hoping that this was the answer, but you're never that lucky. As it turned out, yes, we did have a team go to the house he was spoken to, and it was clear that what he was talking about was a domestic argument, dispute that he'd had, and so we ruled him out.
As news filters back that this isn't their man, Grant Moyle learns the true extent of the victim's dreadful injuries.
Andrew and Rosemary have fought with the killer from the front of the house through to the back. And I would suggest fought valiantly during the attack. Chantel has suffered significant injuries. Chantel was stabbed 33 times, Andrew 29, and Rosemary 50 or more.
The intensity of the violence is hard to process, and more details will come to the fore. Just days after the triple murders, the team focus on people who could determine the family's last movements.
Rosemary and Andrew had gone away down to Adelaide Saturday night to a party.
Chantel had had a party, and at that party several friends had attended and things had been going well.
I understand it wasn't a big party by any stretch of the imagination, but more a case of some friends over, a few drinks, watching TV, watching movies. We went and followed up and found those friends and interviewed those. Now, all of them were helpful. We didn't have any issues with any of them. They told us what we wanted to know, gave us some access to Facebook sites to have a look and clarify some points and get some more background. We did that.
The party is to provide South Australia Police with vital links to Chantel's partner and closest friends.
We spoke to the majority of those on the Tuesday, so the second day. During that process, a uniform officer was speaking to one of the many friends that the name Jason Downey came up.
Jason Downey is an 18-year-old Scottish teenager who emigrated to Kapunda with his mother and brother 6 years before. Having once attended the same school as Chantel, he knows her and her boyfriend.
A statement was taken from him that day. That is the first time his name came up, but it came up no different from anyone else's at that particular time.
Police are also keen to track the last movements of Chantel's partner.
Chantel's boyfriend had sent her a text message at 5:30 a.m. on the Monday morning to her phone, asking how she was because she'd been ill the day before. And he said he didn't receive a reply, but our inquiries showed that a return message was sent from that phone. But Chantel was out of credit on her phone, so the message went off into ether space and we've never been able to retrieve it. But we know the reply was sent. It could not have been sent by Chantel. It had to be sent by the killer. And so we had a look at Chantel's boyfriend in regards to that. Was he telling us the truth? But we were able to rule him out.
As Chantel's boyfriend is eliminated as a suspect, 4 days on, Grant Moyle addresses the growing media.
Well, obviously the offender is still outstanding, and I would suggest the offender or offenders should be considered dangerous. If anyone does know who they are or has suspicions about individuals, please contact police immediately.
And the forensics team discovers something crucial at the crime scene.
The fingerprint specialists moved through the house to take fingerprints. They were spraying a substance called amino black that brings up fingerprints on different surfaces. And they were spraying that on the back of the bedroom door of Chantel's bedroom, and they were targeting a certain area and happened to pick up one fingerprint on the edge of the door, and that was quite detailed.
This is potentially a significant breakthrough. A fingerprint that does not match the victim's could narrow their search for a suspect.
Obviously, we were hopeful that that would get an identification, and we got the word back the next day that, unfortunately, no, it wasn't on the national database, and so we had no match at that particular time. So that told us certainly told us that it wasn't any of the Rowe family.
The lack of a match on their system could simply mean the person has no criminal record. A frustrating result, but the officers press on. Meanwhile, friends, colleagues and residents continue to try and help with the investigation as the hunt for the cold-blooded killer intensifies.
At the end of that first week, sadness overtook the gossip and the speculation. People started to realise that what we had here was just a tragedy of epic proportions, an innocent family who had been absolutely slaughtered for no discernible reason.
Almost 7 days after the multiple stabbings, residents still fear a killer is on the loose, and detectives are desperate to find the culprit, when forensic officers provide another potential breakthrough.
On the 13th of November, we were advised that a DNA profile had been obtained from semen that was found on Chantel, and they had loaded that to the database, and unfortunately there was no match to it. Again, same with the fingerprint. It's great news, but just not quite what we needed at that time. But it certainly confirmed our thoughts that most likely Chantel was the key to this investigation and the relationships she had with other people.
The team now realise that this sexually motivated attack could be central to the killer's intention and start to focus on people associated with Chantel. Who could have any compulsion to murder a 16-year-old girl and her parents?
We had to then go about taking some samples from her male friends and to eliminate those of them having that DNA profile.
As samples are collected, one of the statements taken from a friend sets alarm bells ringing.
We were sitting in the command post and John was reading one of the statements and said, "Oh, let's have a look at this, there's just something not quite right about that." He started to give an alibi when he wasn't asked for one. He made some comments about not being invited to the party on the Saturday night, of not having a girlfriend, and really trying to come up with an alibi without being asked for one, trying to paint a picture. And we thought, we'll do a bit more work on this. That included ringing his place of employment to say, what do you know about this individual? He was visited on Sunday, and a DNA sample and fingerprints were taken from him. And he volunteered that without any problems.
This young man is Jason Downey. He freely offers to help with inquiries, but officers also notice something unusual.
Police officers had visited him and seen the cuts on his hand. Because of the nature of the attack inside the house, it would not be unusual for the offender to suffer some sort of injury as well. He said that at that relevant times he was elsewhere. He was in Freeling, he was in Gawler, he was with another person. He had sustained the injuries to his left hand as a result of falling off a push bike.
With Downey's relaxed attitude and willingness to help, could the cuts be the result of a fall or something far more sinister? Officers have to wait less than 48 hours to find out.
At 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning, I got the phone call that the sample was a match to Downey. I felt that then was the time to move. We couldn't wait any longer. We were on very, very good ground. And so we made the decision, or I made the decision that day, that we would arrest him that evening.
This apparently unassuming 18-year-old has potentially broken into a family home and attacked 3 defenseless people with a knife, inflicting over 100 wounds. Officers realise they must take their next step with caution.
We could march into his workplace and arrest him there, but there's other people that work there. He's a mechanic, he's in a workshop. What weapons or other things were there? If he ran off, what might be the consequences of that? If we went to his home to arrest him there, might he, if his mother was home and there was another woman who lived there as well, might he take them hostage? I didn't want to alert him that we were about to take that step because we didn't want to endanger anyone else.
Officers set about planning a way to get to their number 1 suspect.
We had asked a number of people to come in and sign their statements throughout this investigation. He had one there unsigned, so we decided we'd ask him, through his manager, to drop in on his way home and sign the statement. He was dropped off at the station and informed he was under arrest.
Armed with the DNA results of the testing of the semen and of the fingerprint, 8 days on from the violent murder of Rose, Andrew and Chantel Rowe, South Australian police urgently question one teenager who might be the key to it all. With this powerful forensic evidence, what would Jason Downey reveal?
He said that he'd had consensual intercourse with Chantel some months beforehand. It was explained to him that that couldn't account for the way we'd found the DNA sample, but that seemed to just be dismissed by him. He offered an explanation that he had been at Chantel's boyfriend's place for a while, had left there and driven down to Gawler to McDonald's, had done a number of different things, visited different people, and came back. He'd come back home, he'd had an argument with his mother, and his mother locked him out of the house, so he had to sleep in the car that night. And it was shortly after 11 p.m, as I understand it, that he had that argument and was forced out of the house.
Chantel's boyfriend informed Jason that he wouldn't be staying over at Chantel's house that night. She was ill. She wasn't going to be going to work the next day. She had a bit of a cold. Downey knew that he was not going to be there that night.
But he came up with an excuse that at the relevant times he was elsewhere. He had sustained the injuries to his left hand as a result of falling off a push bike first, and then later he told someone else it was falling off a motorbike.
Downey's alibi isn't adding up, and he has no real explanation for his DNA being found on one of the victims' bodies. As they press for more answers, detectives are keen to let Christopher Rowe know of the latest developments.
As soon as Downey had been arrested, I went around to his home with our victim contact officer and informed him that someone had been arrested and what charges were laid.
As the slightly built teenager faces serious charges, Christopher Rowe now has to brace himself for seeing the alleged killer of his family in court.
The Elizabeth Magistrates Court's interesting because it's home to a lot of low-level crime. I thought they'd brought up the wrong person. I thought they'd brought up some skinny little drug dealer that had been caught on a street corner selling meth to some kids. But no, that was him. I turned around and I looked at the faces of the family members of the Rowes who had come to the court case, and I knew it was him. The hatred and malevolence and grief pouring out of their expressions told the whole story. They knew who he was, and already they had some sense of what was going on.
Once that person was arrested for the crime, I think that's when the community started to get back to some type of normality. I mean, there's probably many that didn't, but I think by and large, I think most people thought, right, that's it.
Jason Downey maintains his innocence during a number of appearances in court.
It was supposed to be 6 weeks. It took over a year. Part of the reason it was blowing out was because the police were continuing their investigations. They wanted to make sure they had everything locked down tight. The other part was Downey himself. What we didn't know at the time was that Downey had started calling his mother and calling his brother from jail, writing them letters and talking about the fact that he didn't do it. The police had come across that correspondence with Downey's mother, with Downey's brother, where he blamed a man in the dark clothing with the green shopping bag, where he claimed, "Oh, I fucked up, Mum. I was in the house and I cradled Chantel as she died, but I didn't do it and I should have told the cops. I'm so sorry." From my understanding, what the police were trying to do was make sure they had DNA evidence locked down, they had fingerprint evidence locked down, footprint evidence, any circumstantial evidence that could put Jason at the house at that time, talking to witnesses about his attitude, talking to people about his obsession with Chantel, scouring his Facebook page, his Bebo page, his internet usage for connections to Chantel, his text messages, his use of his phone, all of those pieces of evidence that would paint the picture of someone that would do anything to be in a romantic relationship with Chantel, to eliminate these ridiculous claims that he was making of a man wearing dark clothes, carrying a green shopping bag, running out of the house, to counteract his claims of, "I was there and Chantel died in my arms, but I didn't do the murder." Anything that could put those knives in his hands at those times. And that was a lot of pressure for them, and they had to get that locked down tight.
Whilst trying to prove Downey's claims are false, South Australia police also uncover more damning evidence against him.
What we did recover from the scene was a digital camera on the kitchen table, I think it was. And we examined that and found the photos of a family lunch that they'd had together, the Rowes had had together on the Sunday afternoon. Those photos proved great evidence because Chantel was holding a USB stick at that time. We were to find the USB stick in his bedroom at his home address and the lanyard to it in his vehicle, I believe. We also found some blood staining on the console of his car that was to be Rosemary and Andrew Rowes. We were able to determine through the examination of the laptop that there'd been a failed login on Chantel's laptop sometime after she was murdered, and that there was some blood staining on the keyboard, but unfortunately not sufficient enough for us to get a DNA profile from.
And the bloody fingerprint found on Chantel's door has finally come back as a match to Downey. More than 1 year on from the tragedy comes one of the biggest turning points in the case so far.
He finally pleaded guilty. I think it came as quite a shock to the system. He finally pleaded guilty, and as it would transpire, that he pleaded guilty 1 year and 1 day after the actual crimes. On each occasion, Christopher had attended, and quite a number of the other relatives and friends had attended those court cases.
It's very hard for both families to have lived with this moment. We're all getting through it. We hope he gets what he deserves.
It was a long process for them and a traumatic process for them.
Downey pleads guilty to the 3 murder charges. Shortly following the anniversary of the tragedy, the family and friends of the victims must now listen to the harrowing details coming out in court.
When a person pleads guilty in a South Australian court, the role of the judge changes to a finder of fact, because a judge must determine a penalty appropriate to that exact crime. The prosecution had no choice but to go through the evidence and, pardon the pun, blow by blow. And that was when everybody concerned with the case got an idea of just what had happened in that house that night.
For the first time, the circumstances surrounding that horrific night are laid bare for all to hear.
He gave an account through his lawyer about what happened that night. I don't accept everything that he said. He has certainly stood in the bath at some stage before the attacks have taken place because of the nature of the shoe print that was there. Whether he actually came in through that window or not, I'm not 100% convinced, but nonetheless he certainly has been in there at some stage. He gave an account of Chantal being attacked first and then having to murder the parents as a result so that he wouldn't get found out.
One of the knives from the Rowe family kitchen became involved, and Andrew was stabbed in excess of 20 times. He was stabbed so many times and with such force that pieces of the knife broke off in his body. There was then a confrontation, according to the court's accepted version of events, with Rose. And again, another knife was introduced. She was stabbed multiple times. She would go on to be stabbed in excess of 50 times by the time that the murder had concluded, but this was sadly the first set of stabbings for her. After they fell, the court ruled that Downey moved into the bedroom.
The poor girl was underneath her bed bleeding from what's been described as a free-flowing wound and has been dragged back out from under the bed and further attacked.
He placed her on top of the bed. He then continued to stab her. In the end, it was 33 different wounds. Then stripped her of her clothing, redressed her, left her on the bed.
After a frenzied and prolonged attack, Downey feebly attempts to cover his tracks and then decides to continue his merciless rampage.
The thing that has always struck me the most about this is that at least 2 members of that family knew someone they loved was being murdered while they were there. And she died having listened to both of her parents be killed and then undergoing that insidious torture herself. It just defies belief.
After an initial attack, he's attempted to clean up some of the crime scene and he's attacked them again. And we know that by the nature of the crime scene.
He tried to mop around Andrew and paused to stab him several more times. It's believed that he then noticed that Rose was still alive and was trying to make her way to the door. And he proceeded to deliver the last of the 55 stab wounds that she would receive until she was dead. At that point, Jason gave up on trying to clean up and left bloody sock prints as he ran out of the house. Nobody saw him leave. All that anybody heard was Rose screaming help 3 times and a noise like something falling over.
Prior to him being sentenced, he, through his solicitor, gave directions on where the shoes he was wearing could be found, and it was the local police officer who followed those directions and eventually found them, and which wasn't far from the murder scene. Then he tried to give directions on where he'd hidden his clothing, the weapons, and some clean-up items because he cleaned up and took those items with him. We took him out of custody just before he was sentenced and spent a day travelling around that area. We were only ever able to recover some clothing of his. We never found the knives.
This detailed account of the level of violence has to be released for the court to hear. Family and friends also have to endure information about Downey's unbelievable actions after he has murdered Andrew, Rose and Chantal.
He's never shown any remorse throughout this whole process. I mean, if you look at his actions after the murder, the night, he's left the scene, he's gone off, he's disposed of his shoes, he's disposed of some clothing, he slept in his car that night. He's attended work the next day, albeit slightly late. Pretended he didn't know anything about it until supposedly hearing it on the news that afternoon, then feigning grief, having to go home early, and then not being able to work the next day because of his grief.
And the cover-up doesn't stop there. Downey is also filmed attempting to show his alleged grief in a very public manner.
He's laid a card and teddy bear at the back gate of the house where a lot of people laid tributes, and he's just played the normal local in grief about what has happened.
Here's a way of people paying him attention, but I've got an excuse that I can go with to get me out of it, so that you don't think really that I'm the killer, but maybe you'll talk about me a little more. Buy a little grey teddy bear, one of the Friends Forever brand, take it, stop, pause, look longingly at the memorial, make sure you know that the camera's filming you at that point. It's like out of a movie scene. He was composing this in his head. That was his dramatic moment, and he was taking full advantage of it. But also it's an excuse, because if I went back there and left a memorial, clearly I didn't do it.
He's mixed with these people during that whole week, even with Chantel's boyfriend. I just don't know how he could do that.
This window into Downey's psyche is also evident from stories of his behaviour whilst in custody.
He considered himself the big man, chest puffed up, walking around. I did the Kapunda triple murders. I did those killings. That was me. I was in court today. Big noting himself. Now, I'm sure some of that was fear, because again, 52 kilograms in a South Australian prison filled with pedophiles, bikers and killers, you'd want to be looking out for yourself very quickly. The family was steeling themselves for a long trial, so were the police, and so were the media.
After a gruelling process lasting more than a year, with all the facts scrutinised, the judge finally delivers his long-awaited sentencing in one of the biggest criminal cases to hit South Australia.
He calculated that Downey deserved a sentence of 35 years, one of the highest in South Australian history. Downey barely reacted again. It wasn't that he didn't care, I think he just didn't understand. I don't think he has the intelligence needed and the insight needed to understand how long 35 years really is. That it's longer again than he's been alive. And that when 35 years expires, he's not necessarily going to get out.
For closure for the family and everything else, it needs to be. And he was obviously guilty. There's no question in my mind about that.
The sentence provokes an emotional reaction from the victim's family.
Please explain to me the justice in this. This is not a justifiable offence. He cannot return my family to me, so why should he have the right to any definition of life?
He pleaded guilty on this occasion and strung it out as long as he could, because he knew the evidence against him was overwhelming. Not because he felt bad for what he did, but he knew, what's the point now? If I plead guilty now, I'll get a discount to some degree, which he did.
As the family tried to process the outcome of the sentence, Sean Fuster learns of another rumour that threatens to cause even more pain.
My editor said to me, "Sean, was Chantel pregnant?" No. Was it ever suggested she was pregnant? No, not in court. There was a rumour way back at the very beginning, an ugly rumour, but the cops knocked that down within the first week, boss. Why? Newspaper just splashed all over their website that she was killed and she was pregnant. I couldn't believe it. I thought, this family has dealt with enough. And I went tracking down the stringer that had written it. And I said to him, where do you get off? It's been publicly knocked down. It wasn't mentioned once in court. How could you possibly attach that? Oh, well, I thought it would be interesting. What I said to him next is unrepeatable. It's undoubtable that Jason Downey is extremely immature. He was raised with no male perspective on his life, no father figure. He had a stepfather, but that was much later in life, after he and his mother and brother moved to Australia from Scotland, leaving his older sister behind.
As Downey begins his sentence of more than 3 decades without his freedom, he decides to write a letter attempting to apologise for his crimes.
The biggest sign of Jason's immaturity was the letter that he wrote, which, to my mind, is the single most inexplicably inadequate apology that's ever been committed to paper. It's juvenile. The handwriting is juvenile. There are loops for eyes, there are missing words, there are random capitalisations, there are spelling mistakes all through it. And he apologises for my recent actions and how sad he is that he no longer has a car and a career. There's no perspective, there's no insight. He may very well be sorry in a limited way, but he doesn't understand fully what he's done. Just that incredibly blinkered, narrow understanding of what he's done and the tragedy that he's perpetrated.
I think, in due respect, there's a lot of hurt out there that we didn't know about. A lot of people probably grieving a lot more than we suspect, and probably still are. And that's why we have this ongoing, respect, and we're careful in how we go about talking to anybody in relation to it now.
The lives of Chantal, Rose and Andrew Rowe have been taken in the most cowardly and unimaginable way. The murderer is to serve the majority of his adult life in prison. But for those left behind, the main question still lingers. Why did Downey go to the lengths of killing a mother, father and their young daughter?
His goal was to have Chantal, whether that was emotionally, whether it was physically, whatever it took. Being confronted by Andrew, probably being told something along the lines of, "Get out, you little freak," or "What the hell are you doing in my house?" being questioned, caused the snap. I don't think this was premeditated in the sense that he went there with the intent to kill, but he was prepared to do whatever it took to make Chantal his that night, up to and including murder in a way that he hadn't prepared for consciously, but something in him was clearly prepared to do. His lawyer said to the court, "I can't give Your Honour an explanation for what happened. My client doesn't remember it. He snapped into a fugue state." And the court has to ask itself how a person of his size, of his nature, with no criminal record could possibly do something like this. The prosecution had a very easy answer for it. It's very simple, Your Honour, he's a liar. He's a liar and he's a coward and he's a vicious brute. That's it. The motive's as old as time itself, simple jealousy, and he snapped.
I can't believe that another human being would do that to a little girl or any child.
There's no reason for her not to have come home. We can only assume that something's happened.
It's everybody's nightmare, a parent's nightmare, their child being abducted.
Ebony, if you're out there, darling, and if you can get home or give us a ring.
It's pretty much the worst case scenario.
All that time we were looking for Ebony, and the killer's car is a few yards away. I hadn't heard something as callous as being on the search party to cover your tracks. It disgusts me 20 years later.
On the afternoon of Wednesday, the 19th of August, 1992, pretty Ebony Simpson disappeared on her way home from school.
She went to school, she didn't come home. And she got off the school bus and, she had to walk a couple of 100 yards just up the road. And she just didn't come home.
The tragedy that was to unfold would rip through the heart of a family who had moved to the small town of Bargo many years before to start a new life.
We'd bought an old farmhouse and done that up. We'd been there about 14 years. We'd chosen to live in the country, and the boys at a country school, and then Ebony came along. So it was an ideal life for children and us.
With 2 young boys, Christine and her husband Peter completed their family with the arrival of their daughter, Ebony Jane, in 1983.
I remember when I had Ebony, I had 2 boys and then I had Ebony, and I just couldn't believe I got this beautiful little girl. Yeah, she was pretty special. She was soft, kind, and we were very close. She was just lovely and warm. It was just really nice, you know, a nice way to live. And we moved to the country so that the kids would have a better life, and then this happened to us.
The Simpsons built their new life on their farm until everything changed in August 1992.
Ebony had a talk at school with the police the day before about stranger danger. She came home and told me. I said to her, if anything ever comes up, you know, in your life, anything happens, you have to come home and tell me, you know. Then, you know, I read her a story, she went to bed. And the next day when she went to school, she didn't come home.
The usual school routine meant Christine met Ebony at the bus stop, just meters away from their house, at the end of the day.
Normally I was always home and I was always there. And we were getting insurance and I was a bit late, and I said to one of my sons, you know, just go down and meet the bus for Ebony. I'll be a little bit late, but I won't be far away.
Ebony's school was only 5 kilometres away from the Simpson home. Her bus journey took 10 minutes, and the walk from the bus stop up to the Simpson farm was just 1 kilometre away. But this last-minute change of plan brought a strange twist of fate.
His bus was late and he thought she was at home, and then I came home, and as soon as I pulled up at the house I knew that there was no shoes there. Ebony's shoes weren't at the front door. My husband at the time, Peter, notified the police, rang them, and I went down to the bus stop. And then I went along the road and I ran through the creek and I went in the house next door looking for her, thinking maybe she got scared or something, you know. But she was a very responsible young girl, you know. She was 9, nearly 10 at the time.
I drove out to the Simpsons home where I met with a bunch of other police that were waiting there for me.
Local officers quickly began an action plan to search for the schoolgirl.
The first information I was given was that Ebony had caught the school bus from Bargo School, and she was seen to actually get off the bus at the corner of Arena Road and Bargo Road and started walking towards her house.
Rod Grant now had a possible sighting, but Ebony's movements were still sketchy. As the search for her got underway, further news came in.
An older man come up to the command post. He'd heard that there was something wrong and a lot of police cars, so he come up to ask what was happening. And he told the General Duties Police that his 2 sons had seen Ebony walking home, and just before she got around the corner just near her house, there was a small yellow car with a man with the bonnet up. And the boys waved to her, to Ebony, and she waved back to them, and they continued driving home.
This new information placed somebody else in the vicinity, but police needed more.
Then I went inside and I spoke to Peter and Christine Simpson. Got some background information about Ebony, her normal behaviours. Pretty much wanted to find out, you know, is this out of the norm? And straight away, you could tell it was completely out of the norm. Yeah, because she was a very reliable young girl, come from a good family background, no dramas at all.
And further news is to heighten the growing sense of panic.
Once she got to that car, She didn't make it past that point because there's a couple more houses between her home and where this car was. And so we had a confirmed sighting that she was at that site, so she didn't make it past there. And so then the alarm bells are ringing.
With her family frantic with worry, this news of a sighting of her and a car spotted on her route home, officers were now in a race against time to discover where the little girl could have gone.
At that time, there's two tasks, and we had to separate that pretty early on. There's a search for Ebony, and there's also a criminal investigation, both taking place at the same time. So the search was set up as a grid pattern for several kilometres around where she was last seen. Homes and paddocks, dams, bush.
By now, darkness has fallen. News of Ebony's disappearance is spreading through the community and beyond.
There's no reason for her not to have come home, but we can only assume that something's happened.
As officers ramp up their search, they call on members of the public to help their plight.
I can still remember what's going through my mind. The priority is just to find her and find her alive. The whole town was volunteering to come and help. Everybody who was anybody, pretty much, was out there looking, searching. So that had to be coordinated because you couldn't just have people just running around everywhere.
Police are looking for her, everybody's searching for her. I mean, helicopters were flying above, with sensor lights on them.
As the minutes turn into agonising hours for the Simpsons, buildings and acres of bushland are scoured for any clues.
I think you make anything up in your head that gets you through that time, but I don't think we slept. We just stood there waiting for some sort of answer. They said, she would have gone to someone else's place to play, but she wouldn't do that. She wasn't like that, you know what I mean?
By the following morning, Christine and her family are desperate for news. As more people offer to help with the search, Rod Grant tries to uncover anything unusual during the last few weeks.
I'd spoken with Christine back at the house and I said, had she seen anything suspicious? And at first she said, no, she hadn't seen anybody suspicious hanging around. And then I remembered maybe I should rephrase the question. What have you seen? Have you seen any cars or people that don't fit the area? And then she said, well, matter of fact, I saw a man parked down near the bus stop in a small yellow car. And she said, I think it was a Datsun 120Y.
This was now the second description given to Rod of a yellow car seen in the area.
Christine told me she actually saw that car twice. And from the canvass that we did with neighbours as well that night and the following days, they said that they'd seen a car hanging around for a few weeks, this little yellow car.
I thought he was just some young guy and, his car had broken down, and I went down to get Ebony off the bus and went past him, and I remember looking at him and thinking, I'll pick Ebony up and I'll come back around and I'll see if I can help you.
This vehicle is now becoming a major focus. Rod is desperate to see if Christine's account of this car is similar to the one seen by the two boys who waved at Ebony just moments before she vanished.
I pulled up my notebook and I started talking to one of the boys. He was 13 and his brother was 17. And they started straight away telling me what they'd seen. It was a Mazda 808. The bonnet was up. The man was leaning into the engine bay with something black in his hand. The car's fairly dirty. There's mud splashed up on the near side. And then he said there's patch-up work on it as well. And you can see where somebody has painted. He said it's called yellow ochre. And he told me the name of the colour. And I thought, oh my God, this is so much detail.
As a clearer picture is emerging on this vehicle last seen near Ebony, other officers work with her family as the search is scaled up.
Detective Sergeant Cole Pateman and Detective Sergeant Steve Foster, they went out to the Simpson household and sat out there with the Simpsons, and they got pretty much a really, really detailed background about, you know, what Ebony was wearing that day, what she had in her backpack, what she had for lunch, all those sorts of details, all the background of the family, is there any problems?
The police command post, set up outside the Simpson home, has by now become a focal point for concerned residents, extra officers, and the country's media, all desperate to help.
Everybody was given an area to search in their groups. It was the police, SES, Rural Fire Service, and just volunteers from the community. So they all had areas that they had to go and search.
There's a sense of urgency there, people running around and locals walking up to police, how can I get involved, how can I help? People arriving all the time, various specialist units arriving police-wise, a real big build-up right outside the family home.
A couple of police that were coming from Campbelltown arrived late to the briefing, they missed the briefing, and a sergeant there, he told them, they said, well, what's the go, what are we looking for? And they said, well, they described Ebony, and we're also looking for a yellow Mazda 808. And one of the guys said to the sergeant, he said, like that car over there. And the sergeant turned and looked at the car, which was parked at the command post, just not even 50 metres away. He said, if that's a Mazda 808, that's the type of car we're looking for. So alarm bell started ringing again.
Astonishingly, this similar car was just yards away. But crucially, the officers cannot jump to conclusions. As they hone in on the vehicle, Christine is asked to describe the man she has seen in the days before.
My role at this stage was to do what they call a photo fit, or a Penry ID, based on information that Christine Simpson could provide me with. As you can imagine, she was going through a large amount of emotions at that time, so I had to be very careful with what I did and what I said to Christine. But in the end, she provided me with a brilliant description and a fantastic photo fit that would progress the investigation considerably.
What happens next is to be the biggest turning point in the hunt for Ebony so far.
We couldn't do anything more with what we had, with what she'd provided me. I walked outside, and as I was walking up to the front gate of the property, my boss came down, and I just said, well, this is what Christine Simpson's given me. And he took a step back and he said, oh, that's the bloke we were just talking to.
Wayne had put this picture together at the house. At the same time, the guys realised that we better watch this car and see who comes back to it. They're doing checks on who it belongs to.
One of the policemen came back down to our farm and they said, I think the guy's out the front. And they said to me, we want you to come and have a look at the car. And I went up to the front, out the front of our farm, and I had a look at the car and I said, well, it's similar, but I don't know, it's just a yellow car, you know. But the one thing was that when I saw him 3 days before losing Ebony, he was looking into the motor of the car and it was stopped on the side of the road, and it was a Mazda 808 and the bonnet opened the other way. And I remembered that. And that's what that car was.
The car has a striking resemblance to the yellow vehicle seen in the area. And the photo-fit picture police have compiled from Christine's recollection now looks very similar to the description given by the boys Rod has interviewed. But officers know nothing more. Time is running out, and they have to act fast.
He came back to the car, so they started asking him a couple of questions about the car, where his movements and all that sort of stuff. Then they called Wayne out to take some photos of the car, and he just put this picture together with Christine.
Police waste no time questioning the man about his car.
He was really compliant, actually. He wasn't evasive in any ways, really. He was fairly quiet. John Rain's first priority was, can you open the boot? And he did, because he thought, well, is Ebony still in the boot if this is the car? He was really compliant, he was really calm. So he It didn't really raise suspicions, like he wasn't evasive and he wasn't, trying to avoid helping.
Nothing looks immediately suspicious in the boot. But officers know it is essential to get the vehicle to the station for further tests.
I think they said at that stage that we want to use it to take some photographs to put in the media for the news that night, to put this is the type of car that we're looking for the media. That was it wasn't a ploy, but it was a real thing that we were going to do anyway, just in case, because we didn't want to put all the eggs in one basket.
Measures are quickly taken to tow the car to a secure police garage, where forensic searches get underway.
My role with the vehicle was to go over it with a fine-tooth comb and try and identify any physical evidence that may either put Ebony in that car. It might have been biological evidence, it might have been clothing, it could have been school books, anything. I was looking for anything.
As Wayne Day scrutinises the vehicle for any clues, the owner is eager to help with inquiries and agrees to go to the station to answer any questions.
They go inside into the detective's office and say, what are we going to do? Asking each other, as I call it, the hard questions. Do we just go and put it straight on him? Where is she? Because we've still got a missing girl. The criminal investigation at that stage was second priority. The first priority was finding her alive. And he was so cool and calm that they had to second guess themselves and think, maybe he isn't involved, so we'll just treat him like, a witness about his car, ask him where he's been.
Time is now of the essence. The team need answers. But they are still unsure if this man had anything to do with Ebony's disappearance. As questioning gets underway, they learn more about this local, now identified as Andrew Garforth.
Andrew Peter Garforth, born 5/8/63.
He'd only been in the area a few months. He and his wife had moved to the area. Prior to that, he came from Western Australia. So there really weren't any alarm bells about this guy living in the community or being a threat to kids in the area. Just totally out of the blue, as far as everyone was concerned. And he was married with 2 children and, lived up the road and hadn't been in trouble locally, as far as we know.
With little information on this 29-year-old, the detectives are eager to find out if Garforth has anything to do with Ebony's disappearance.
He just starts asking him questions about what his movements were.
Went to the hardware shop, bought 2 bolts.
He gave an account, pretty much that he'd been to the video store at Tarmore.
What time was it when you left to go to Bargo to the video store?
Yeah, 3:45.
In his account, he avoided saying that he went along Bargo Road and Arena Road.
I drove down Pheasant's Nest Road, turned left onto Nightingale.
Because that would have been the most direct route that he would have taken if he was going into Bargo to return a video or to go to the shop. So after a few more questions, Detective Pateman was just thinking what next to ask him pretty much, and then he goes over the version again. Can you just give me that again? And then he gives a whole different route that he took.
And left onto Arena, right onto Bargo.
Arena Road is the last place Ebony was seen. Garforth's change in his account immediately raises their suspicion.
I'm pretty sure he realised that his movements could be checked about the times because, one, we could have spoken to his wife what time he left, the people at the shop, the video shop.
How long does it take you to drive from your home at Pheasant's Nest to the video store at Bargo?
Roughly 10 minutes.
Officers have only been questioning Garforth for 15 minutes. Nobody could have expected the next words he was to utter.
And when the young girl was walking past the car, we grabbed her in the boot.
He starts with, I drove along Bargo Road, I turned onto Arena Road, I stopped to put oil in my car.
I had the bonnet of the car up, I had the boot of the car open.
I was putting oil in the car when the girl walked past.
And when the young girl was walking past the car, we grabbed her in the boot.
the detectives are led to believe Ebony never made it beyond the vehicle.
I drove away.
And where did you drive to?
Down Arena.
Now Garforth is calmly reaffirming their worst fears.
And what did she say to you?
She asked me if I was going to let her go, and I said I didn't know.
With this horrifying admission, they are one step closer to uncovering her fate and are now desperate to discover her whereabouts.
He drove Ebony to a bush track down not far away. He went to the back of his car, got some speaker wire, and he tied her hands behind her back and her feet behind her as well, and then tied her feet to her hands. And he just picked her up and threw her in the dam.
I really don't know what my emotions were at that moment in time. I suppose my main concern is, well, we need to try and locate her in case she's still alive. That's probably the most important thing at that stage. There was no mucking around. It's in the cars. Pack up, get to this location.
It is now 11 p.m. Ebony has been missing for over 30 hours. The alert goes out to get to the scene of the crime as quickly as possible. With Garforth willing to show officers the location, they rush to just 6 kilometres from Ebony's home, praying they will find her alive.
We walked up to the dam, and it's something that sticks with me forever, and I get goosebumps talking about it, is walking up over the top of the lip of the dam and seeing the pink lunchbox floating on the water, and the water was like as still, no wind, no movement at all. It was just like glass. As soon as I saw that, I knew she was in there. And we couldn't see her on the banks or anything like that. And yeah, that was probably, it was disappointing. But mind you, with the temperatures in the area at that particular time, she probably wouldn't have survived anyway if she'd been into the water and then come out. She would have been, just the exposure probably would have killed her in any case.
There was no chance that Ebony was still going to be alive because there was no sign of her when she was still in the water, so they could tell that she was thrown, 8 to 10 metres in. There's no way she could make it, and the way she was tied, no way she could make it to the bank.
Ebony Simpson has died at the hands of her brutal attacker in what appears to be an utterly senseless crime. Andrew Garforth stood at the water's edge, describing his actions to police with no remorse whatsoever. Whilst the police and rescue teams have the painful task of recovering Ebony's body, officers are sent to Christine and her family to deliver the heartbreaking news.
I think it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, the police came, and they'd sent 2 really young policemen up to tell us, and they weren't equipped, And I just remember falling onto the veranda saying, I've got to hold her, let me hold her, She might come back to life if I could hold her. They said, you can't do that.
Nothing can prepare Ebony's family for the other news that is to follow.
In the next interview, he went on that there was more. He actually said that he sexually assaulted Ebony.
I took her up onto the bank of the dam, tied her hands and her feet, pulled her pants down around her ankles, sexually assaulted her, picked her up and threw her in the dam.
I couldn't clean my teeth. I couldn't get out of bed. If it wasn't for my 2 sisters coming and bringing food and feeding my other 2 children and telling me to get up and have a shower and do this, do that. I mean, I was a moron, I was a zombie. You know, I just sat and stared. Well, nothing means anything anymore. I mean, all the things about life, you know, that are so precious has just been ripped away from you.
The sexual assault and murder of this defenceless little girl soon shook the whole country and provoked a fierce reaction.
There was community outrage very quickly. From the moment the matter was scheduled for court, there's a large gathering of locals were out the front of the court, and everyone was wild, ropeable.
Keep looking over your shoulder, buddy.
Yelling abuse at Garforth.
We'll tie his arms and legs and see how he goes. Come on, get him here now.
You know, you filthy so-and-so, you die, you pig, and, you know, hang him and all this sort of stuff. It was a real lynch mob stuff. And you couldn't blame them. It was the community venting.
Police waste no time charging Garforth with murder. After this initial appearance, the trial is set, whilst further evidence is gathered, and Ebony laid to rest.
The image that will stay with me for life, apart from the facts of the story, but the image that will stay with me for life is seeing that little coffin. As adults, you go to funerals, you say goodbye to your loved ones, but this wasn't an adult coffin, it was a child's coffin, and that was someone saying goodbye to their child, that there's a little girl who was so brutally murdered and didn't deserve it, and the community was saying goodbye to her.
For the Simpsons, their fight is only just beginning. With a trial to face, they are to never imagine the further pain they will endure.
This man's raped and murdered my daughter. He's a pedophile. The legal system will step in and everything. No, it doesn't. I believed he'd just get locked up for life, but it's not like that. When we were going to Court Darlinghurst for the sentencing, they said he'd get 14 to 20 years. I said, not acceptable. I said, that's not acceptable. I said, you can bring back the death penalty, lock him up for the term of his natural life, or I'll get a hitman and blow him away. And, you know, I wasn't joking back then, and I'm still not joking today.
Garforth's unspeakable actions are hard enough to bear, but additional news is to come to light about his movements after he had brutally murdered the little girl.
Perpetrator, the man who'd done this to Ebony, had been up and joined the search party and walked all over our farm, and he knew where she was all the time.
They filmed the briefing taking place, and I still remember the footage of Andrew Garforth standing smack bang in the middle of all the people. And there's, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 people standing there having their briefing about to move out to where they were going to search. He was just standing there, standing smack bang in the middle of it.
He joined the search party. I mean, when I think of that today, it makes me nearly sick, you know? We were looking after the person who knew where she was and had already killed her.
How callous can you be to murder a little girl like that and then pretend to search for her? Obviously, it's come out now, or suggested that his Garforth's wife convinced him to join the search party, do the right thing, do the community thing, and, you know, he's masqueraded as a searcher for his own victim. That's just unbelievably callous.
As Christine and her family have to consider life without Ebony, they spark a nationwide change in the way victims of crime are dealt with.
We tried to get counselling, and nobody wanted to take us on because it's, I guess, you're too hard. How are you going to counsel a family like us? What are you going to tell us? You know? You're going to tell us it's all right and we'll be okay, and if we just do this, that and the other, things will be fine.
I got a phone call from Peter, Ebony's father, and he was really very angry, and he said words to the effect of, you know, everyone else is getting counselling here. We haven't had a phone call from a counsellor. They really wanted something which they deserved, some decent support, professional support, help with their two boys, help with each other.
You got one person in that crazy system in there that just follows the book. You got one person who stepped outside the boundaries, and that was John Merrick, you know, and you don't get that very often.
And I can't remember how the idea first crystallised, but it was something like these people might benefit from actually speaking to someone who's been through maybe a similar experience. And there was an old bloke, Gary Lynch, who was the father of Anita Cobby, who was murdered some years prior.
So he introduced us to Anita Cobby's parents, Gary and Peg Lynch, and John and 4 other social workers from Glebe, Coroner's Court, and we got together, and that's how the Homicide Victim Support Group was started.
The Homicide Victim Support Group was formed by Christine, John and a small group of people who sadly have one thing in common. Their initial aim is to help each other and those in similar circumstances. As their work gets underway, Andrew Garforth's highly anticipated trial falls just weeks after and uncovers further evidence towards his guilt.
As it turns out, we had some really, really good evidence. Palm prints on the inner mudguard, inner guard in the boot. I was able to interpret that, which had the child in the car. Was able to reveal finger marks underneath on the underside of the boot lid, and you could see where these hands were scraping on the underside of the boot lid.
The shoe prints in the mud matched to Ebony's shoes. His shoe prints that we got off him on the day. There was blonde hairs in the boot, and he was wearing a woolen jumper. He had a grey woolen jumper. There was one of her hairs on that, or a couple actually, on that jumper. There was a strand of wool from his jumper on a branch at the dam. There was DNA evidence that we obtained from Ebony's body.
All of this extra detail is hugely compelling and weighs heavily in favour of the prosecution. But Garforth himself makes no attempt to plead his innocence.
We didn't need to use all that because he pleaded guilty straight up, pretty much straight away. He pleaded guilty straight up, and he was given life in jail.
"11 months after her murder, Ebony Simpson's killer is handed a sentence that will see him die in jail.
Garforth said to his wife, "I'll see you in 14 years." I thought, over my dead body.
The fact remains that Ebony Simpson got the death sentence, the Simpson family's got the life sentence, and Garforth's got bed and breakfast.
He knew the system. He'd been in the system all his life. He knew he'd probably get 14 and be out in 8. So that's how confident he was that he'd played the system over the years. I think people need to understand a lot of this because it's the people who can change the system.
Garforth is familiar with the law, having previous convictions in other parts of Australia for minor crimes. This time, his sentence will match the severity of his crime.
He was one of the very first people in New South Wales to get life meaning life. In the past, life had meant 20 years or so, but here he was one of the first ever in New South Wales to get the newly legislated life meaning life, and without a shadow of a doubt, and there was not one person in New South Wales, I suggest, that thought he wasn't deserving of it.
Garforth will spend the rest of his days behind bars for snatching Ebony from a roadside and killing her in cold blood.
I think they think when you go to court and come out and then you just get on with your life. Well, it's not like that. you know? There seems to be, there seems to be a lot of rehabilitation for the perpetrators of crime, but there's no rehabilitation for the victims.
In response to her experience, Christine channels her energy into making major changes for victims of crime with the support group.
Well, I think I took all my anger and turned it into something positive and set up Ebony House, first recovery centre in the world for homicide victims. So I burnt up all my angry energy into positive, you know, and I didn't know what else to do with it. Made a lot of changes and very powerful back then.
As a tribute to Christine's daughter, in December 1995, Ebony House is opened for anyone affected by the murder of a loved one, as a place to be able to grieve in private. The support group also goes on to make historic changes.
Police are being taught now at the academy by the homicide victim support group and other folk how to best respond to families, what to say, what not to do, you know, correct procedures. Now that was a real change. Police are very involved and intertwined from the outset with the families and providing them information, updates, details as well, without compromising the investigation as well, without giving stuff away. We've had sentencing submissions and victims' impact statements have made a huge difference as well for families because they feel as though they can be listened to and explain in very personal terms what the murder has meant to them.
I don't think you can make great changes if you haven't felt the pain. It's the pain that drives you. You can feel empathy and try to understand, but you can't feel that power of that wanting change unless it's happened to you.
As the Simpson family has tried to continue with their lives, Garforth has contributed to their ongoing pain since his conviction.
He claims he was bashed in jail, and at one stage he claimed to have lost hearing in one of his ears, and he actually, in many people's eyes, had the cheek, tenacity to apply for victims' compensation. Initially he was successful in one of those claims. I think fortunately it was reviewed and overturned, and then the money was offered to charity.
He crossed the lines of what's acceptable with society, you know, and when you cross those lines, and they're precious lines with children, you can't come back into society. You've already isolated yourself. You're not worthy of living in here, around children or women or anything else, you know? So keep him where he is. It's the safest place for him, trust me.
The counselling for Christine and her family was to span many years, and the effort channelled into the victim support group brought about many milestones and legal changes throughout Australia, one of which guarantees that Garforth has no further rights to appeal his sentence.
We changed a lot of things and that was good. But as I've got older, 20 odd years down the track, I have to say the pain's still the same. I'm happy with what's been done, but I've learned to put it somewhere, and I have built a nice life. Doesn't matter what you do in your life, and I've put my life back together, I think, pretty well. But there's a part of my heart that's broken, and I can't fix it. You know? And it doesn't matter how many years go by, how much I talk about it, I can't fix it. And I'm angry about it, you know? I'm angry about what happened to my daughter. I don't want to have people tell me that I shouldn't be angry. I damn well should be angry. A man took my daughter's life. and ruined our family. I'm angry, all right, you know. And it's just this stupid system we got out there that says you're supposed to forgive and not be angry. I find it absurd, you know. I mean, if I wasn't angry and upset, I wouldn't be a mother, would I? Put Ebony behind you and move on with your life. No, I'll take her with me and move on with my life. I have no forgiveness whatsoever for what that man did to her. And you can move on. You don't have to forgive to move on. I can see Ebony as plain as anything. She's still 9. I can see her hair. I can see everything about her. I can hear her voice. And no, I can't forgive a person who took that away from our family.